counseling call. Let's give people just another 2 minutes to get into the call, and we're going to dive in. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. So thanks for joining, and we'll be with you in just a minute. I mean, just let me know if he pops up. Yeah. So I'm going to flip over to you, right? So you're going to, what? Great. All right, welcome everybody. This is the Leaders in Housing Counseling call, and we have had a pretty intense week here, and so we got a lot of ground to cover, but I'm very glad that you've joined us. Today we're going to talk about the federal funding update. We had a big scramble this week on housing counseling funding. The THUD subcommittee reported out as subcommittee, and then the full appropriations committee voted, and we'll get to that in just a minute on the agenda. We've got an initiative that some of our organizations that we've been working with historically, the FR and NAFA, are doing on CFPB mortgage servicing standards, and we'll be they'll be here to give you a quick rundown of how that might be a helpful thing to figure out what's working and not working in the field. We are going to do a conversation about the legal settlements and about some things that are percolating, and want to get your viewpoint on what might be whether this is a good idea or a bad idea in terms of one of the ways to handle funding in the legal settlements. We have a quick update on Equifax and the pricing on soft pull credit reports, just to make sure people are up to date of what's going on. Matthew's been deep into looking at the HAWK proposal that there's been a lot of conversation about incentives for people getting counseling and education on FHA loans. It's pretty innovative. There's a lot to it. We are working on getting, hopefully, Sarah Jarek or maybe somebody from HUD to give us a Q&A opportunity in the next couple of weeks, but wanted to give people a baseline understanding and make sure we're all on the same page. Our HUD task force letter is finally ready to get submitted, and of course we'll talk a little bit about joining NAHRC at the end. So let's dive in. So Matthew, it's been a long week. A lot of groups on the phone here have really mobilized. I want to first say a big shout out and thanks to the many groups that have written letters, done calls, sent emails to the House and Senate, and especially big push, I know, on NCLR's part, on NUL's part, and certainly our networks, but a lot of groups have stepped up on this. A lot of groups, especially in Maryland and in Illinois and California, where there were key people on the subcommittee and the approps committee. So Matthew, so where are we at now? What's happened?
Yeah, so Bruce kind of laid out the framework of what happened this week. So the first thing was on Tuesday, the THUD subcommittee moved the THUD bill, and pretty surprisingly and really unfortunately, the funding in that bill for the HUD housing counseling assistance was $49 million, and the funding for the NFMC was $50 million. The NFMC that was what we expected and wasn't much of a surprise, but we've been pushing for $60 million for the HUD housing counseling budget, and we're optimistic because a lot of the time the Senate will go along with the President's request. That's what he requested. We felt like we had made the case in the conversations we were having with appropriators for why the increase for HUD housing counseling was justified. So we were disappointed to find out that the number was $49 million. So we mobilized, and as Bruce said, really, there was a tremendous effort on the part of folks on this call and really across the country, and a really impressive response from folks. Really, it was such a short time. We had from Tuesday morning basically through the end of the day yesterday to try to quickly mobilize and try to find someone on the Appropriations Committee to offer an amendment that would have funded it $60 million. And there was a huge outpouring of support. Unfortunately, as far as we know, so the full committee met this morning. Senator Mikulski is the chairwoman of the Approps Committee. She did offer a manager's amendment that we've not seen a draft of yet, but we don't really have any good reason to think that there was an amendment that would have got the housing counseling funding up to $60 million. So that means you see the number on your screen, the numbers. So the Senate committee is, the Senate bill is at $49 million for HUD housing counseling and $50 million for NFMC. The House is at $47 million for HUD housing counseling and $50 million for NFMC. So it's really a tough kind of spot for us. I think one of the things that kind of led to this outcome is the appropriators take a much different view than we do. They always stress in our conversations that they see NFMC and HUD housing counseling as pretty independent appropriations. So somewhat to their mind, it's a $4 million increase for HUD housing counseling, which at a time when a lot of programs are taking pretty good hits, they see it as giving us an increase, which, I mean, it's true and we appreciate it, but we obviously don't see it as two separate programs. We see it as a net loss of $13.5 million. And you know, that was the case we made, but it was a tough sell, especially without getting too far into the weeds. The number they had to work with was a bit lower, was a lot lower than they thought because of FHA receipts. So that's kind of where we stand. We have every reason to think that those will be the numbers that come out of the Senate and the House. They'll meet for a conference. You know, there's obviously not a lot of room between 47 and 49, so we have a pretty good idea that that's where the number is going to turn out. And if there's any questions, or Bruce, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, you know, this was a tough go, and I think one of the things that we have to be pretty careful about is how we message this to the appropriators. So in their view, they view this as last year we got $45 million, and they gave us a $4 million bump up to $49 million. We're one of the very few, maybe the only, we're not sure, group that actually got an increase on their baseline funding, and so major programs like CDBG and Home all took cuts. Now, Matthew's completely right. I think we're all painfully aware that we went from down on NFMC funding from $67.5 million down to $50 million. That was the President's proposal, but the idea was that substantial amounts of those monies would transfer into HUD housing counseling, and that would give us not a net gain, but a much smaller loss. And that ended up, instead of being an increase of $15 million, ended up being an increase of $4 million. So that's the, but from the perspective of people like Senator Mikulski, Senator Murray, Patty Murray, and Feinstein and Durbin and folks like that, is that they have funded an increase, and we want to be positive and supportive around this. There was an expectation, as Matthew said, that there'd be more money available. FHA's, the income off of FHA came in substantially lower, and as a result, there was less money to work with than it was expected. You know, we'll try to follow this as closely as we can. But the problem here is that we're in an environment where everybody else is taking cuts, and on the specific HUD housing counseling program, it's seen as we've taken a gain. So it's a credit to the effectiveness of the work we've done. For 4 years ago, as we all painfully know, we had been zeroed out, and we are a much more effective and vocal group on the Hill and in the local congressional districts. We want to keep that up. We will keep looking if there's any opportunity to improve the situation, but you know, I think Matthew sized it up as best as we can. Okay, so Are there any questions or any? Okay. All right. Well, really appreciate all the good work that people did. So we do a lot of work with the Americans for Financial Reform and with the National Fair Housing Alliance. In the past, we've had many joint meetings and conversations. And they've got a special project right now on the mortgage servicing standards by the CFPB. So we're having Becky Thies from AFR and Diane Cipollone from NAFA tell us what they're doing, and we're going to help collect this information. So Becky, Diane, who wants to jump in?
Hi, this is Becky. I'll just first say thanks for having us on. This project is really important as we work with the agencies in DC to try and get them more information. So we're excited about getting as much out of this project as we can. But I think I'll let Diane handle the details.
Oh, thank you. This is Diane Cipollone from the National Fair Housing Alliance. I just want to clarify that NAFA, which is our acronym, we are a member of Americans for Financial Reform, so that it's not just NAFA and AFR, and it's also many representatives from quite a few different organizations who have been working together over the past few months to bring to the CFPB's attention the fact that we believe already that the servicers are not complying with many aspects of the new loss mitigation rule. And whenever we raise this, and this is with any regulator, they want to know, well, what services are we talking about, and what are some examples of the non-compliance? So I, along with quite a few other advocates, and as well as Becky from AFR, we've been working together, and Matthew has been extremely helpful. So thank you so much for your input to create basically an email that we're asking if you can actually send us copies of documents. For example, the response from the servicer that acknowledges the receipt of the loss mitigation application, and does that response, if it's incomplete, for example, and they're supposed to say, we've reviewed your application, it is incomplete, and we need the following information, and they have to give you a date for that. We would like to see examples of those letters, because included in that letter is supposed to be an explanation so that the homeowner knows exactly what information has yet to be provided. So that's one example. And we'd also like to see examples of compliance. If you get a letter and you get a response, and particularly if it's within the 5 business days, that says your application is complete and we're going to review, or your application is incomplete and here are the documents. And you look at them and you say, okay, we know exactly what we need to provide. So what we're going to do is, in this email, just outline the various key documents. For example, what I just said, the acknowledgement of the receipt of the application, the denials of loss mitigation. The new rule requires that the denial has some specificity so that the borrower understands why they're being denied, and then if they want to appeal, they understand, well, what is it that they need to refute or ask the servicer to correct. And we're already seeing denials that are of no use to anybody, such as, for example, in HAMP, we can't give you a HAMP modification because we'd have to modify your loan beyond the parameters of the program. Well, that tells the homeowner nothing. So we're already seeing that, and we'd like to get examples for that issue. The other issues are, for example, how are the servicers responding after an appeal? If there's any any good news, for example, or is it going to be routinely a denial upheld by supposedly other personnel in the servicing office? We want to see if there's any dual tracking, so that if your client has submitted an application more than 37 days before a sale, a complete application, and you get a notice of a sale date, for example. Any issues with transfer of servicing, and then responses to notice of error and requests for information. And in this email, we really give you the main bullets of what you should be looking for. So we know that pulling together documents and scanning them and emailing them is time intensive. But we feel that this is the best way to get the CFPB's attention with concrete examples. And we really hope that you'll urge your staff to respond and provide these documents, because we think it would go a long way to getting some better enforcement and maybe even some better rules if it's clear that the servicers are either not complying or they're just not workable rules. Becky, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, this isn't something that we've launched quite yet, but we hope to get this out as soon as possible, because we want to start collecting these documents as soon as we can, so that we can meet back with the CFPB with some information.
Good. Well, thank you so much. So we'll be glad to distribute this. I understand you have a short timeline when you do it, so there'll be a quick turnaround. And we're looking for the actual documents that people have in the when they submit to identify the problems that they're having with servicers, and we'll use this to inform the CFPB about the enforcement of standards, identify servicers that are not in compliance. Sounds like a good opportunity, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us. So as soon as you've got something, we're ready to go.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Look for it very, very shortly.
Okay. Thanks both. All right. So we also have Andy Buchek. We think we can get him on the line. He's on the Hill. Andy, I don't know how many of you know him, but he works, he is a lobbyist on the Hill for, he can tell you the agency, but he works representing the Homeownership Preservation Foundation, HPF, the Hope Hotline people, but he's also been really working on housing counseling funding for the last quite a few number of years, and is one of our go-to people trying to figure out what to do, what the best tactics are. So he was on the Hill this morning at the subcommittee meeting, and we're trying to figure out if we can patch him in, and are we able to? Okay, Andy, are you there?
I am. Can you?
Oh, right, it worked. Oh, good. Well, thank you for doing this. We did do a kind of a quick rundown of what we thought had happened, but I think we'd love to hear from you and your direct thoughts on HUD housing counseling funding, and if there's anything to say about NFMC.
Sure. So good afternoon to everyone. I apologize in advance for all the noise. I'm standing in a stairwell.
You have to speak up a little bit. Andy? Well, this is the problem with on the ground. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better, much better.
Their bill earlier included funding.
Andy, you're breaking up pretty seriously. Are you better off not standing in a stairwell?
I'm going to try to do a little more background noise, so I apologize. How's this? Any better?
Much better, much better. Thank you.
So the bill included $49 million for the HUD Counseling Assistance Program, and
Andy? Andy, we're not, Andy, we can't hear you at this point. Well, okay.
how's this? Is this better?
Oh, that's much better.
I'm going to try it one last time. 3 times should be the charm.
Good.
The House Senate bill included $49 million for the counseling program and $50 million for the NFMC testing, is what Bruce had discussed before I was able to. So let me talk NFMC first because it's a little more simple. The funding level in the Senate bill matches the funding level in the House bill, which also matches the funding level requested by the President in his budget. And so all of those things being in line, I think it is fairly safe to assume that the funding level in FY15 for the NFMC program is going to be $50 million without a lot of ability to influence that in any way, shape, or form. On the HUD counseling side, it's a little more complicated in that the bill includes, depending on how you look at the numbers, and Bruce and I have had a lot of discussions about interpreting these numbers, the funding level is at $49 million in the Senate is an actual $4 million increase over what the current enacted bill is. There are very few programs in that bill that actually is an increase over their, and the biggest one, frankly, is that the FHA receipts, which are the money generated at FHA based on fees paid for FHA loans, have been going down, and the estimates are that they're going to continue to go down, which doesn't allow the Appropriations Committee to spend as much money as maybe they had wanted. And as a result of that, they were forced to make some very difficult decisions on what funding levels they could assign to each program. And so, as I mentioned, very few got an increase. Housing counseling was one. Now, granted, the increase is not exactly as high as we would have liked, and we think we have a really good case to make a bigger increase. But that being said, and again, Bruce and I have talked about this quite a bit, what we don't want to do in our communication with folks is seem ungrateful that we are one of the few programs that got an increase, or do anything that might come across to those who have supported housing counseling in the past that we're not appreciative of their efforts. And so I'd strongly encourage folks as they talk with legislators going forward, I think we still want to make sure that we have strong support for housing counseling. And the difference between the House bill and the Senate bill right now is that the Senate bill is at $49 million, the House bill is at $47. Even my math skills can figure out if they split the difference, it would be 48. But every dollar obviously helps more families get counseling. And so as we talk with folks, I think it's okay to continue to ask, is there any opportunity to increase the Senate bill as it moves forward through the process, but also to push for the Senate number at 49 to be the final number, because, as I said, every dollar makes a difference. And I think those are the types of messages that we want to convey, and those are the types of things where we might be able to influence things. I did have a brief exchange with a staff person this afternoon.
Andy?
They could provide a small increase to the housing counseling program. And so I think it's important not to seem ungrateful for that. Again, we want our supporters to, want to work with us and want us to be appreciative of their efforts. And so I think it's always important to continue to take that approach as we continue to push for additional resources for these important programs.
And I think we missed the conversation you had with the staff person on the Hill.
Okay. Basically, what she said to me was that they would have liked to provide an increase for a number of different programs, increase for programs like housing counseling, but there wasn't enough money in their allocation to do that, and they had to make very tough choices, which is what we sort of knew all along. And the reason I mention it is that just because we didn't get the increase that we were hoping for doesn't mean that those people who support housing counseling are less supportive of housing counseling. And I think it's important to make that distinction as we communicate with folks, especially folks like Senator Murray from Washington, who chairs the Transportation HUD Subcommittee, and some of the other folks who have been longtime supporters of housing counseling. That if, and that was sort of my, I guess, my point on that front.
Good. Yeah, I think we and we talked about this a little bit earlier too on the call. It's going to be important for us to be speaking with one voice on the idea that there is plenty of support. We're in a much different environment than we were 4 or 5 years ago when we got zeroed out. There is real concrete support for housing counseling among Democrats, and also we've seen among some Republicans. Senator Collins was supportive, of course, Representative Dent, and we'll need to work on trying to develop more of that. But our basic message is we really appreciate what's been done so far, and is there any way to squeak out something more process and to put us in the best position on the negotiations with the will be a conference committee between the House and Senate to get the final number. So that point is a little ways off, probably. Right, that's likely to be this fall.
Just one last point on process. You can still hear me. Senator Mikulski, who is the chair of the full Appropriations Committee, announced, and you may have seen some of these reports in the press too, that beginning on June 16th, that the Senate, the full Senate, is going to start taking up appropriations bills. And Senator Mikulski has indicated that her goal is to together for consideration so that they can maximize floor consideration. At this point, there are only 4 bills that are through the full committee markup, and so there's only 4 bills for them to pick from, and our bill is obviously one of them. So this bill could come up as early as next week, or the 16th rather, of June on the Senate floor. We don't know that yet. My suspicion is that the other 2 bills, which are VA and Homeland Security, may be first in the queue simply because they've been finished. That has not been decided yet, and so this could move. Unlike in past years, this could move very quickly on the Senate side as well.
And we would, and in terms of actions that people should take, so we're talking mid-June, we're talking about a couple weeks away. Are there actions that we should be thinking about doing, and when should we be thinking about doing them?
That's a tougher question than it normally is, only because I think, let me back up. I think that what we should be doing is communicating with our senators about the importance of funding for housing counseling and the importance of maximizing funding for housing counseling. I think that only a couple hours after the markup is a little bit too soon to figure out whether or there is a possibility of some type of formal amendment being offered to increase funding, and whether that makes sense or not. And there still might be an opportunity to tweak that number just a little bit through some type of manager's amendment or something like that. My personal thought on that is that that is probably a long shot, to be perfectly square with everyone on the phone, but I wouldn't 100% rule it out yet. We just haven't had a chance to run through all of the traps yet. But as I mentioned, there are so many programs that got less funding this year than last year. It's going to be harder for us to make the case to increase, give us a bigger increase when other very popular programs are seeing real dollar cuts to their programs. And so that's where we have to sort of take the temperature and figure out if putting on a full court press to increase our funding through an amendment would be well received. And I just don't know the answer to that yet based on just the limited conversations I've had in the last couple of hours of folks since the markup.
Good. Well, certainly we'll pass on what we learn, and if you can share with what you learn, I think we'll send out some notes of appreciation to the Appropriations Committee's members for the support they've shown. Okay, Andy, thanks. Go ahead.
That would be a great thing to do, is to send a note that says basically sort of summarizes this conversation in terms of we're appreciative, we recognize you had to make tough decisions. We're appreciative that the housing counseling program received an increase, although it's not as big of an increase as we were hoping for. You know, something, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being realistic about it, but it's being appreciative, even though it's not as much as we wanted, we're still appreciative of the increase, I think is an important message to convey if you're going to set.
Good. All right. Thanks so much, Andy. Thanks for all your good work. And we'll continue to take this step at a time, every step at a time as it goes. All right. Thanks so much. And why don't we quickly run through the rest of the agenda. I want to make sure we have time for the HAWC discussion as well. But very quickly, on this mortgage servicing standards with the CFPB, we're planning on doing a national survey similar to what we did a few months ago on figuring out what the kind of the broader terms of what's working and not working in the servicing standards. So this would be different than the document collections that was discussed by Becky and Diane earlier. And this will be a survey. We'll do it jointly with the National Council of La Raza. I'm sure many of you have participated in this past, and hopefully you will as well. But keep an eye out for it. We're probably a few weeks away still in terms of getting the exact questions done. But we expect it to be a pretty quick snapshot that you can give of what you're seeing, of what's working in the field. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about settlement funds. As many of you know, we've been working a lot on trying to see if we could get the the independent foreclosure review, and in that very frustrating experience with the IFR, with the independent foreclosure review that's in front of the OCC and the Fed, while there were many, many really challenging things, it does look like there will be some money of checks that were never cashed or people that were never found, and that amount might be in the $300 to $400 million range, might be possibly as high as $500 million. They're getting an 85% contact rate, which in this business is pretty high, and that's why the number shrunk some. But we thought this was coming to an end. Recent conversations with regulators, it sounds like they are leaning towards doing something that would continue to try to reach borrowers, reach the people who would get a settlement, get something under the settlement. We will continue to try to encourage this idea of a financial capability fund where housing counseling agencies are essentially paid for working with families that are impacted negatively by the foreclosure crisis and help them get them back on their feet. It would be really for funding the hard work around helping people improve their credit scores, get in control of their budget, work down debt so that they can recover from the impact of the recession. You know, we thought this was getting a lot of traction. It doesn't seem to be the focus right now, and so we may be losing some ground on this. And so while we won't give up on this, there's some concern that we may not be, that IFR may not be the opportunity we thought it was to really work with people on this. However, it turns out there are more settlements coming down the pike, and part of the discussion that we've been hearing is there is some interest about so one of the problems you have is, so if you've got a block of money, how do you distribute it to organizations to do the work that they do? And sort of it was phrased to me by one regulator, government doesn't want to be in the place of picking, you know, one group over another and saying you do a better job or you're a better match than someone else. And so they're trying to figure out some kind of neutral and maybe less politicized way of distributing funds. One of the things that's under discussion now, and we're going to want your opinion on this, is whether if there's a pot of money, and this won't be the IFR, it'll also be other settlements, if there's a pot of money, the idea would be that they would give it to state housing finance agencies in proportionate to the number of borrowers impacted in the settlement in each of those states. So there'd be a clean, crisp formula, and then it would be given to a state housing finance agency, and it would be, and they'd be given some parameters on how they can spend the money. And the kinds of things that would probably be on that list would be housing counseling for sure, but also neighborhood stabilization, things like that. So I don't know what that list will be, and it's certainly not a done deal, but one of the things that we're going to be asked is this a good idea? Should we work through the housing finance agencies? And so we need to figure out whether this works for us or not, and we understand that there's broad variance in the quality and capacity of different state housing finance agencies. But in some places there's good, strong working relationships, and in some there might be, if there's money available, those could be developed. But maybe it's not. Maybe there's a lot of bad blood on the floor that can't get repaired. We're trying to figure all this out. So we've got a couple poll questions. So and the idea is to help us figure out if this would work or not. So the first one is, would you be comfortable with your state HFA distributing settlement funds? Now, some people are in organizations that have more than one state, and just give your best impression on your experience with state housing finance agencies. But the idea is that the regulators are looking at this as sort of a neutral channel, and let's figure out if this is a good idea for our industry or not.
I'll just jump in while people are voting. A few people have weighed in with some comments. So we have Paul McLaughlin from New Hampshire weighing in that their HFA is already distributing funds from the National Mortgage Settlement, and that they're doing a great job with it. And then from Laura Buxbaum in Maine, she said that she'd be okay with HFA doing it, but she'd prefer it went through the AG's office in Maine because there's another agency which currently distributes funds to housing counseling agencies. So the AG would be likely to pass the money on to that other agency to get it to housing counseling agencies. I think we probably kept it open long enough, so I'm just going to close the poll and put up the results.
Oh. Well, that's interesting. So 73% said yes, 23% no. Can we tell how many people voted?
It is about 50.
50. So not everybody voted, but that's at least a healthy slice. Okay. Well, good. So we have a second set of questions. Matthew's been working on this, so okay. So, and this one is more to figure out what concerns you might have, and if it just works well, and what your experience is. So the choices are, how well does your state HFA work with housing counseling agencies? So the first one is works well with counseling agencies. The second one is doesn't work with most counseling agencies. So if HFA actually only has a very small select groups of number of groups that it works with, and especially if you're not one of those groups, you should check that box. Too political, too many bureaucratic hurdles, and the other one is other, and click that, and then if you can put something in the box, in the chat box about that, we'd be very interested in that as well. We definitely read all these.
All right, I'll send
Sure.
an email to anyone that answers other and just ask for what
Okay.
your take is.
Good. Okay, so and Matthew and I don't get to vote on this, so it's all up to you guys here. So do you think that's enough time? Okay. So let's see what it tells us. And there we go. Well, still, again, a strong showing on works well with counseling agencies. 10% of the respondents said it doesn't work with most counseling agencies. So I mean, that's a healthy number of states. Well, we should try to identify which states those are. Too political, that's a little bit. Too many bureaucratic hurdles, well, that's a lot more. That's 20% of the respondents. And we only got a little bit on the other. Okay, well, this will be part of an ongoing dialogue. We're going to try to learn more about this. But this is all pretty fresh information as of yesterday, so we're just learning about this, so we'll see where things go, but this will be helpful in trying to think about this some. Okay, let's jump quickly to Equifax on the soft pull pricing on the credit reports. We've talked about this before. There are 3 credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. They all do hard pulls, which are specifically credit reports for done in terms of credit situations where a lender's offering credit to somebody and evaluating them for credit. Soft pulls should be for non-credit situations and obviously for housing counseling. The discount that we have is all for soft pull credit reports on our credit reporting program. The Equifax, we've now got documentation, and it charges twice as much for its soft pull as for its hard pull. So one of the reasons that there was an increase in our rate for our discount was because of largely because of the Equifax charging more for soft pulls, and none of the other agencies do. So Experian and TransUnion, same price for hard pull and soft pulls. It is the same credit report. And there's a trade association for the credit providers, so not the bureaus, but the consolidators, the companies like Credco and CIS, and there's 1,600 of them, I think, out there. So each of those agencies, there's a trade association for most of them, and they have been able to provide some documentation. We were in a meeting that was actually an AFR meeting with Richard Cordray, head of the CFPB, gave him letters from us and from the Trade Association offering to provide documentation on this. It's a tricky situation for the credit providers because they're dependent on the credit bureaus, and Equifax can be very unfriendly and retaliatory. So they needed an anonymous situation in order to be able to document the situation. So we're trying to alert them to the problem. CFPB is going to look at the evidence. They don't involve themselves with pricing, but we're concerned about it, and there's the discriminatory element to this. The majority of our clients, of course, are people of color, and there may be we're hoping they'll look at what handles are available there, but trying to do some impact there. If we would be able to change the situation, it could save agencies hundreds, in some cases thousands, and in a few cases, a few of you, tens of thousands of dollars. So we're very interested in trying to move that forward. So let's move to the next slide. So we're up to Hawk now. So Matthew. Matthew's going to give us an overview on Hawk and how it works mechanically, and then we're talking with HUD about doing a deeper dive with them in a Q&A. Hopefully we'll try to schedule this in the next couple of weeks. So Matthew.
Yes, thanks. So I imagined this as I was going to kind of go through and encourage everyone to jump in, either using the chat box or the question box, and I'm going to lay out basically what HUD has proposed. We're going to be looking for people's feedback. I think it's going to have to be probably less interactive now, but I definitely want to encourage everyone as I'm running through the various things in the proposal, that if you have thoughts, if you have questions, if you have something doesn't strike you as how it should be, definitely weigh in, and we'll take that into consideration, and we'll do something more formal as well to give people an opportunity to weigh in. But so the first thing that I want to stress is that at this point it's only a proposal. So they published their 30-page proposal, But at this point, everyone on this call has an opportunity to weigh in and submit comments. It could be just a paragraph. It could be pages long. Weighing in and letting HUD and FHA know what you think, and if you think things need to look different, you have an opportunity to have your voice heard. So I think that's important for everyone to realize. Comments are due July 14th, which is a Monday. And we will submit comments NHRC. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do that. In the past, we have done sign-on letter comments. We may well do that this time, or we may just, get people's input and submit comments. But we'll figure that out. But we will get input from everyone. So just a quick overview. I think everyone's familiar with the general structure. HAWK is basically an incentive program that FHA is going to offer to FHA borrowers incentives, which will be in the form of reductions in their mortgage insurance premiums, both upfront and annual. They get the incentives for doing pre- and post-purchase counseling and education. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity for a lot of reasons. First, it's a great chance to get more people into pre-purchase counseling, which is good for us as an industry, and it's good for home buyers. I think a really important part of this is it helps to normalize the idea that those who benefit from counseling, and here it's borrowers and lenders, that they should help meet the cost of counseling, and I think that's important for us as an industry. And it's also going to be a great chance to demonstrate the effectiveness of counseling. So logistically, what they're proposing now is a 4-year pilot program, and it's going to be rolled out in 2 phases. The first phase is going to be just a startup. It's going to be a small number of borrowers, lenders, counseling agencies, and servicers that participate, and it's really just kind of working out the kinks. But the notice that they put out that announces the HAWK program also serves as a notice to counseling agencies that they're soliciting essentially expressions of interest for agencies that want to participate in phase 1. You'll need to, and I actually reached out to HUD. The notice itself is pretty vague on what agencies that are interested in participating in phase 1 should do to express that. So I've reached out to HUD and we'll follow up with more specifics. It may just be sending HUD a letter and letting them know why you meet the criteria, but we'll follow up on that. Phase 2, all HUD-approved counseling agencies will be able to participate. You won't be required to. It's voluntary, but as long as you're HUD-approved, and we'll go through a few other criteria in just a minute, but that's the general kind of requirement. So there's 3 counseling and education requirements, and then a loan repayment performance requirement for the borrower to meet to get all of the incentives that are available. So step 1 is pre-contract counseling and education. Step 2 is pre-closing counseling. Step 3 is post-closing counseling. And then to receive all the available incentives, borrowers must not have any 90-day delinquencies during the first 18 months of the loan. They do kind of include a caveat that any delinquency that's caused by or a result of a transfer of servicing will not be counted as a delinquency for purposes of loan repayment performance. I think one thing that's worth thinking about is, are there other situations where a borrower may be delinquent that it's kind of not their fault, that we should suggest to HUD as kind of an something else that shouldn't count as a strike against the borrower. So the incentives, when the borrower completes steps 1 and 2, they get a 50 basis point reduction on the upfront mortgage insurance and a permanent reduction of 10 basis points on their annual mortgage insurance premium. When the borrower completes step 3, the post-closing counseling, and then they go those 18 months without a 90-day delinquency, there's an additional permanent reduction of 15 points. Borrower eligibility. The borrower has to be a first-time home buyer. I forget exactly, and Bruce may know this, how they define it. It's not strictly speaking a first-time home buyer. However, HUD defines that. And the other thing is that they just need to qualify for an FHA mortgage. So it's pretty broad eligibility criteria for borrowers. For counseling agencies, the eligibility, you must be a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. And that includes branches, affiliates, and subgrantees of approved agencies. Your approved work plan needs to include pre-purchase counseling and education. And then you'll have to be registered in the Federal Housing Administration's Connection System, or FHAC. I don't know if they call it FHAC. and qualified to issue certificates from FHAC evidencing the completion of counseling and education. As far as the requirements for the counseling and education, the counseling needs to be delivered in accordance with HUD regulations, directives, handbooks, just the general kind of caveat that HUD requires. The other big requirement, though, is that it needs to meet it needs to comply with national industry standards. So that's I think that's not generally true of HUD's counseling. They don't generally require that. That's specific to the HAWK program. And then each of the specific steps along the way has a specific duration and content requirements that I'll get to in a second. The method of delivering the counseling, it can be in person, it can be via telephone or internet, or it can be by any other mutually agreeable methods. And then the last thing is that the agency needs to disclose at intake whether fees for service are charged on a per person or per household basis. And all of the borrowers on the loan need to complete the counseling in order to receive all of the incentives. So then the specific requirements as far as the content, duration, timing, and all that. For the pre-contract counseling, it needs to be a minimum of 6 hours of counseling and education. At least 1.5 hours of that need to be counseling. The way that, and we'll get to this in a second when we talk about the pricing, HUD assumes basically that it's going to be 1.5 hours of counseling and 4.5 hours of education. And the way it's set up, it seems like I would be surprised if agencies were not following that model. So that's another thing to think about if that's necessarily a good thing. The required content, all right, sorry, I was just checking the time. The required content, so they give a long list of kind of optional things that can be covered. The only things that are required to be covered during the pre-contract counseling and education are analysis of homeownership readiness, household budget development, analysis of credit and debt, affordability analysis, and an explanation of the HAWK program, including MIP incentives, housing counseling requirements, and payment of counseling costs. As far as the timing, so the certificate needs to be issued, the certificate of completion needs to be issued at least 10 days prior to ratification of a pre-purchase contract. And I know that's something we've always pushed for trying to get folks into the door as early in the process as possible. So again, but folks can weigh in and say, 10 days isn't enough, whatever thoughts people may have on that. The pre-closing counseling requirements, so it needs to be 1 hour of counseling. There's a fairly long list, and it's true of this and the post-counseling, a long list of things to cover in an hour, and I'll be interested if folks have thoughts on this. The required content is a review of the mortgage loan information that has been provided by the lender, a reassessment of the costs of homeownership based on the particular home and loan, general expectations for the closing process, including review of the good faith estimate, truth in lending statement, loan disclosures, and other mortgage and closing documents, APR and interest rate, earnest money, the appraisal, title insurance, property and casualty insurance, inspections, and escrow. So a lot of those are, fairly discrete topics, I think, but it still seems to me like a lot to cover in 1 hour. As far as the timing, the pre-closing certificate needs to be issued no earlier than the date of the loan application and no later than 3 days prior to settlement. All right, the post-closing counseling requirements, again, it's 1 hour of counseling. This needs to be issued no earlier than 30 days following the closing and not later than 1 year after closing. So between a month and a year after closing, they need to do this 1 hour. The required content, and this is an even longer list, but new household budget reflecting expenses of homeownership, including saving for planned and unplanned expenses, how to maintain and improve the home, recognizing home repair scams, delinquency prevention and resources available to intervene in the risk of delinquency or default, federal, state, and local laws relating to homeownership and mortgage servicing, maintaining good credit, taxes, reserves, home equity, refinancing and alternatives, utility costs, energy efficiency, selling the home. So I'm just going to stress this again, that if folks think that that's an impossible list of things to cover in an hour of counseling, I mean, you would have to, theoretically, you would have to be issuing a certificate. You couldn't issue the certificate until you were signed off on them having covered all of these things. And if theoretically it's going to be, if it's going to be more than an hour's worth of time to cover that, I think it's important that we let HUD know that and ask them to adjust their expectations on either side, into either the amount of time that's required or what the content of what needs to be required. One of the harder sections to understand in the proposal has to do with the costs and reasonable fees for counseling and education. I think there's some question marks there in terms of what exactly they're saying, but I'm just going to give the best rundown that I can. The starting point is they make the distinction between the cost of providing counseling and education and the fees that can be charged for services provided. So HUD says that they regulate fees, but they don't cap the cost of each element. Meaning there's a limit to how much can be charged to the borrower, but that agencies can theoretically seek other sources of payment for services if they exceed the amount that's paid by the borrower. So HUD does an estimate for how much the HAWC counseling and education will cost. They say that for the counseling, they expect it to be $100 an hour. And for the education, they think it should be $150 for the 4.5-hour session, and that should include materials provided and a credit report if you're doing one. So again, that's something I'm interested to hear what folks think, if those values are where it should be. And then they say for the reasonable fees that for step 1 for the 6 hours of counseling and education, $300. Step 2 for the pre-closing, $100, and step 3 for the post-closing hour, $100 as well. They make clear that agencies can cover the cost themselves through the HUD Housing Counseling Grant or other sources, but they do recommend a payment structure if agencies want to pass the cost on to the borrower and the lender. So for the pre-contract counseling and education, they say that borrowers are expected, but then they also make clear that they're not required to pay a portion of the cost of the pre-contract counseling. So again, their estimate for the cost is that it should be $300, $150 for 1.5 hours of counseling, and $150 for 4.5 hours of education. They say fees to the consumer in excess of those amounts must have documentation to establish that they are reasonable and customary. I think they're saying that if those are the rates you're charging, that it's kind of evidence that they deem that already reasonable and customary. But if you're exceeding that, then you would have to document why it is reasonable and customary. For the pre-closing counseling, if the agency wants the borrower and the lender to pay some or all of the cost, it's a little bit convoluted how they imagine it. They say that the lender at closing can make a payment directly to the agency. They kind of say that in passing and don't put any real meat on that, so I think that's a question mark for them. What they go into more detail on is the borrower paying the agency and the lender reimbursing the borrower at closing. If that's happening, the certificate of completion that the agency gives the borrower is proof of payment. The amount paid and reimbursed can't be higher than $250. So if your cost is higher than $250, you could get that from other sources, but you wouldn't be able to charge that to the borrower and have the borrower be reimbursed by the lender. For the post-closing counseling, so at closing, the lender gives the borrower essentially a voucher for $100. Once the borrower does the hour of post-closing counseling, they get the certificate of completion, submit that to the lender along with the voucher. On the certificate it says what the actual cost was, and the lender reimburses the borrower for the actual cost up to $100, or if there's multiple borrowers on the loan, up to $150. So I know we're closely out of time. I'm going to stop now. I think I got through most everything that I wanted to. And we'll turn it over to Bruce now.
Yeah, we did get a request for the PowerPoint, but I think it's from what you're working on, if there's a possibility to get that outline.
Absolutely. I will send everyone my 6 pages of notes on the HAWK program.
Okay, but type them up first, okay?
They are.
That's a joke. Okay. All right. Good. Yeah, so listen, this is a lot, and there's a lot in it. This is a big opportunity for our work, and we're reaching out to Sarah Jarick and seeing if we can't have a more Q&A format with her around HAWK. But we also need to think about how we want to respond in terms of submitting comments. Matthew started breaking down some of the issues in the talk, but definitely want to hear from you as well, and hoping that a few of you can just pull up the proposed rule and take a look at it, and we'll get materials out to you, and let's start a conversation going on what needs to be done with this. Good. So let's see. One quick thing is HUD Task Force. Do you want to do a 1-minute review, Matthew, on that?
We have the letter ready to go. We hit 3 kind of big points: the biennial program reviews, the reporting, and the housing counseling system. I think it does a good job of kind of outlining, a lot of the concerns that we hear when we talk to people in the field about HUD, and some suggestions for how things can be improved. But it's really just kind of starting the conversation. The next step is we're going to ask for really a full-day meeting between representatives of the task force and the appropriate people at HUD, and just have a working meeting and start working on trying to resolve some of these concerns that people have brought to us.
And Afreen Alam has headed up that task force, but quite a number of you have participated in it. We appreciate that. We'll be working on another task force very soon on the high-cost loans and negative amortization loans. How do we counsel on these? So if you're interested, please dive into that. Actually, we're already assembling a list of people who are interested, so if you want to, let us know right away. We normally have our next call on the 3rd Thursday of the month. I have a conflict then, and we're trying to work out a date with HUD about doing the HAWK briefing. So that we'll figure out a different time for that call, either that week or the following week, and we'll communicate that as soon as we've got the date. Please think about joining the National Housing Resource Center if you haven't already, and we've definitely had a great surge of memberships in the last couple months, and that's terrific. This is how we support to keep the work going and keep us independent, and we really appreciate all that the members do. We are working on some member-specific materials, a series of webinars around HUD compliance and around other issues that matter to people a lot. We are also working on some a member-protected pages that will provide resources for members who joined. We'll still continue doing our website and all the resources we've got out there already, but really trying to make it so that we show some appreciation for the people that have stepped up to be members of the National Housing Resource Center. So have a great week, folks. I think we did ourselves proud on the housing counseling funding front, and really reaching out to Congress and to the Senate in this case. There'll be more coming up shortly, we have learned, but we'll keep on top of it. So keep up your good work. We really appreciate it a lot. Thanks a lot.